Welcome back to another episode of Side Hustle Central. Essentially, what we do on this podcast is we talk about side hustles, how you can make extra money, and how you can turn your side hustle into a full-time job, or just things that people had to go through to do their side hustles to make the extra money, and then how that might relate to you. Today, we have a special guest, a pastor, Mr. Michael Eskinazi. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely, yeah. So this one's kind of funny since we did, as you can see with the background and everything, I am the media guy for the Two Mics with Two Mics podcast, which we do here for the church for our pastors. And so we just got done recording that podcast, which was a good time with another special guest.
Yes,
So
practically a Norseman. He's enormous.
So for people who don't know you, just, I guess, introduce yourself and who you are, what you do. You know he's a pastor. So so how did you get into ministry? What are all the things like you had to go through to get there?
All right. So I'll do my best to give a nice synopsis.
Yes. Yeah.
Originally a New Yorker, born and raised. I was raised in the church. In terms of the jobs that I had, my first job was at 13 years old. I worked at a high-end nursery as a cashier, illegally, because you were not allowed to work as a cashier in New York in any way, shape, or form until you were 14 years old.
Child labor laws.
Yes, it was great. I loved having a job at 13 because I liked money. But I walked away from the faith. I didn't return to the faith and give my life to the Lord Jesus Christ until I was 22. And I immersed myself in the mission field to disprove the Lord's existence. It did not work. Gave my life back to Him. Was a missionary in Ireland and Fiji and Samoa. Went to Bible school. Ended up moving away from New York and got married to my current and final wife, and only wife, Sarah. We got married in Colorado Springs, and slowly but surely we ended up in Nebraska. And it was there that we started to get more into ministry, into daily ministry, I'll call it, meaning that we weren't separating ourselves from normal life. We were doing normal life and doing ministry at the same time. And so with time, I ended up becoming the youth pastor and the associate pastor of the church I'm currently a part of. So that's more or less a brief synopsis of my life.
So, as basically every Nebraskan would ask, how did you end up in Nebraska? Why? That's more of the reason. Why did you come to Nebraska? Nobody comes to Nebraska.
Well, we're going to see how weird this may get. I don't know your viewers, but when my wife and I got married in Colorado Springs, it wasn't Colorado Springs, but it was Colorado Springs adjacent. Mm-hmm. At that time, weed was made legal. Now, the same way that, alcohol has its medicinal purposes, so does marijuana. So does those things. There's proven studies, all that stuff. But when you give the general population something that can keep them docile, escape reality, or make a crutch of some kind for people's emotional stunted state, people take advantage of that. The same way they did alcohol. Alcohol used to be used for trauma victims and, for sterilization only. And then you give it to the general population, they use it to escape. So when that happened in Colorado where they made weed legal, I knew that insurance rates would go up. I knew that crime would go up because now the street level thugs are competing with the government. And I also knew that there would be an increase in taxes. And even though they've talked about, how, they put on the forefront that this has helped the economy.
Yeah.
It comes with its setbacks.
Yeah, cannabis has generated hundreds of millions of dollars in tax revenue, stuff like that.
And so we felt very strongly that we needed to leave Colorado. So we started to pray. But one thing that we did is we did our research because you don't want to go in blind. You want to know what you're up against. So actually we got this book called Strategic Relocation by Joel Skousen. Joel Skousen used to create and build bomb shelters and fallout shelters for ex-military, ex-government all over the world. And so he had all these different statistics compiled to where he had humidity percentages, gun laws, homeschool laws, regular school laws, unemployment rates, kind of everything, all compiled. Even military targets. Which states would be military targets? Which locations would be military targets most likely attacked by a foreign power? And so we did all that research and we narrowed it down based on my income at the time to Oklahoma, Nebraska, and Idaho. And we prayed because now we did our research, but we wanted the direction of the Lord. We prayed and we felt very strongly going to Lincoln, Nebraska. So we actually bought a house sight unseen. We had other people look at it for us. And so we drove into Nebraska without knowing where we were going in terms of like the climate, the culture. We just knew, okay, this is what we know. The Lord directed us, and so we ended up here.
Did you have any connections in Lincoln?
Nope.
Okay. But your in-laws live here now.
My in-laws joined us 2 years later.
Okay.
They were also in Colorado.
Gotcha.
So
Interesting. We always like to hear the stories of like, how did somebody go from New York to Colorado to Lincoln, Nebraska?
Oh, yeah, I didn't even say that. I'm a New Yorker. My wife is from Colorado originally.
Yeah.
We actually met on the mission field in Hawaii. That was
Yes.
where our school was.
Yeah.
So that was the connection there, just
Okay.
FYI.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting... It's always so interesting when people are like, yeah, I'm not from Nebraska. I ended up here. And then you hear all these... A lot of times they don't have any connection to Nebraska, and then they just end up here somehow. Mm-hmm. And it's a safe place for now.
It's becoming more common.
It's, yeah.
And I'm kind of like it.
Yep.
So
Yeah. Okay, so when you were starting out in ministry here, you came to Nebraska. You've talked to me a little bit about some of the jobs you've had to do in the past and essentially the struggles to like push through. You bought a house, sight unseen. Did you have a job lined up then?
So when I returned from the mission field the second time around, and it was actually when I did Bible school, I came back to New York and I had no money. I had no job. And basically I was starting my life off again because I had left all the stuff behind because for your viewers, I was very much into the side hustle of the illegal kind.
Yeah.
And so that was my life, and I left that.
High
yes,
cash.
Yes. I actually did not have a credit card for that specific reason until I came back the second time around from my missionary journey. That was the first credit card I ever got. And I worked for a warehouse for a security camera company. They specifically just shipped out security cameras all over the world. So that's where I started, and the hours were just kind of weird, and it wasn't enough pay. And so I started working for the newly bankrupted Bed Bath & Beyond. I think they're only online now, if I'm not mistaken. And their business model, I mean, they had a great business model, but it did not survive. Like, they didn't do upgrades to the point where when 2020 hit and people were doing these, kind of self-checkouts, these, what do they call it when you park outside?
Yeah,
curbside delivery.
Yeah.
Their system was not up to par, ready to take the hit. And so that's why, because I'm just seeing that from working with their systems, that's one of the reasons why they went bankrupt, because they just they didn't do the upgrades that they could have done prior.
Gotcha.
And so I worked for them in Colorado Springs. And when I was in Colorado Springs, I'm also a drummer. And so I was drumming and serving in my church, just volunteer serving. I always knew I was called into full-time ministry, but I didn't know in what capacity at the time. It's been suggested to me at that time, oh, you should, you called to be a pastor. And I said, well, forget about it.
Yeah.
But I was just serving. I was drumming. I was in home groups. And I was working at Bed Bath & Beyond, but they kept me at like the 38, 39 hours. So they didn't have to do full-time benefits or anything like that.
Gotcha.
And there were times where in my fridge, we would have a Coca-Cola, a pizza, and leftover hamburger helper. That was what was in our fridge.
Yeah.
Because my wife was pregnant at the time, and she was working like, I'm going to say maybe twice a week, part-time, 2-3 hours at Staples Copy Center. And so,
Gotcha.
and she was pregnant with our daughter right now, our 10-year-old daughter, 10 and a half, whatever she is, 10 and a half. Yeah. Anyway, so I had to think about that for a second. Actually, more than that. But anyway, so I was working at Bed Bath & Beyond. When we came here, I managed to transfer, but they were playing the same kind of games.
Gotcha.
So when I came here, I had the intention, all right, God, what are you going to do? I'm getting a house because it actually made more sense to get a house here than an apartment in Lincoln. It's very strange. It's more affordable to live in a house than it is to live in an apartment. And so I transferred to Bed Bath & Beyond. Now, one thing that was interesting about Bed Bath -- Beyond is they had this thing called the Beyond Store.
Yeah.
I know they did that in Click or whatever,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
no, it wasn't like that.
Right.
Christopher Walken doesn't come out, though that would be fun for me. They do Beyond Store sales where it's like, hey, here's the products that we have in the store, but we have more products online. And if you don't want this blender, we have 5 others online. And if you did Beyond Stores, you were recognized. Okay. And they liked Beyond Store sales. They enjoyed that stuff. And the store in Colorado, I was working stockroom, and at one point they were short staffed, and I started doing sales. Now, you don't get commission or anything like that, but it's like, I'm going to go on the floor. I'm going to help customers out. And then if they're not satisfied, let me see what we got in the Beyond Store.
Yeah, I gotcha.
Basically saying online.
Yeah.
And when I started doing that, I actually became the #1 salesman, Beyond Store sales, in that store several months in a row, to where I started ticking off the less mature adults, which was just stupid. Because it's like, instead of pat on the back, you get it, it's not in-store sales.
Exactly, yeah.
And so when I transferred here, I became the #1 Beyond Store salesman in that place, and I just ticked everybody off. And it wasn't like I was like, walking around with my chest puffed out like,
Right.
Like, no, I was just doing my job. But I only stayed at that place for about a month and a half. That was it. But I got involved in a church, started drumming immediately, because I always knew this is what I'm supposed to do, is be in ministry. I don't know what it is yet, but I'm supposed to be. So I was in connect groups or cell groups or home groups, whatever you want to call them. I was drumming at 3 different locations that the church had at least twice a week. And so I was working at Bed Bath & Beyond. My wife was fully pregnant, and so she wasn't doing anything. So that was my main source of income at that time.
Yeah.
So should I tell you what corresponded, or I want to keep talking?
No,
if you got,
absolutely.
Okay.
Keep going.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it wasn't enough to sustain us.
Yep.
And so I started looking at jobs, and for me, I'm a college dropout. I've dropped out of college 3 times. The last time I took it seriously. It's just funds, and I wasn't going to take out a college loan. First 2 times I was a joke, and I just didn't care. But a high school graduate, which actually does make a difference in terms of your poverty level in this country, because we have great income mobility. Praise the Lord. And so I actually was looking around, and I saw that there was an employment agency. I've never done one of those in my life. And so went to the employment agency, and they said, okay, we pay you, and we hook you up with someone who's looking to try you on. They're going to try you on for a year. This one's 6 months, whatever. The first one they tried to hook me up with was a florist. And you know what? It's a funny thing. I never thought about this. My great-grandfather was actually a barber.
Okay.
And I believe it was either Brooklyn or the Bronx, one of the boroughs. And during the Great Depression, they didn't feel it because everyone needs their haircut.
Yep.
It's kind of like the same thing with florists. People get married, people die.
Yeah, right.
People graduate, people have celebrations of anniversaries. Flowers are always needed.
Yep.
I couldn't get behind it though. I don't know why. I just wasn't a fan. So I tried it on. I said, no, this isn't for me. So the employment agency hooked me up with a local Lincoln-based company that literally puts logos on shirts. Essentially, it's embroidery. And it wasn't screen printing. It was something like watercolor printing, where it's like you could do multicolor for a fraction of the price of screen printing, because with screen printing, you have to put on multiple colors.
Yeah.
So I was their salesman. I had the worst training I've ever received in my entire life. And I've had a lot of jobs just because I never stuck with a job too much when I was younger. But it was the worst training I ever received. It was, here's the catalog, get familiar with it. Well, there's 50 different catalogs of crud you sell.
Yeah.
That was the first thing. And then go find people. go cold call. How do I cold call with this business?
Right.
Never was trained in that. Okay, well, go find new clients. Okay, how? So that's how I actually learned Lincoln's geography. Was I would drive around, giving samples out to all these different businesses, and there was a point where he said, after a year, they wanted to offer me the job because I was doing better than their previous people that they tried on. The boss was accommodating in some ways, but he was a horrible boss, the worst boss I ever had, because he would fly off the handle. He'd get ticked off. I mean, I remember walking into his office and seeing on the light switch, there was, like the ID tags, right, that they have.
Yeah.
And at this time, I am still serving at that church where I'm drumming 3 times a week.
Yep.
But he had hanging from it, and it was just a naked girl. So I would actually stand outside the door of his office because it's like, I don't want to come in and look at porn.
Right.
That's how I felt. But he would get mad. He didn't train me. And after a year, there was an understanding, hey, if you made X amount of dollars in sales, then I'll give you a commission check. Because I was still being employed with that. I was being paid hourly by this other place. And finally, I met that goal. I was so excited. Like, oh, yeah, let's just take a figure number. $10,000. Or no, I'll say $5,000. And from what I understand from the way that he positioned it verbally, it was once I reach $5,000, I get commission off of every other sale I make past that. So I thought it was accumulatory over several months because I was starting from scratch.
Yeah.
Well, he said, no, when you get a one-time sale of 10, anything above that, you get a commission check. Or a one-time sale of 5, anything above that, you get a commission check. So it would have to be that every sale that was above $5,000, I would get a commission check over that, not accumulatory. So if I didn't have a $5,000, I wouldn't get a commission check at all.
Yeah. So it was like no point getting small sales.
Correct. And he wasn't giving me tips and tricks on how to do it because he had his clientele of big names here in Lincoln, where he was able to sustain his business model as well as his livelihood.
Yeah.
But for someone coming in, I had nothing.
Yeah.
And I'm selling, Cutter and Buck. I'm selling Cutter and Buck shirts to, different industries and T-shirts to baseball teams. It was just ridiculous. So with that job, at that point, my daughter was born, and I was still at that church, and actually it was kind of like I was seeing some things in that church that just weren't really biblical. And so I was starting to notice some things. I brought things up to leadership. I didn't go around gossiping or nothing. And at that time, again, I was like, I got to get out of this. I got to get out of this. I know I'm still called to ministry, but this is not enough money. This is not enough time. This is not a great boss. This is just a horrible work environment. Yeah, I have an office, but who gives a crud?
Right.
And so I started looking around again, and it was my first and my last call center job.
Yeah.
Yes. Should I keep going?
And was that the Verizon job?
Yes.
Okay.
It was my first and last call center job.
Yeah. And I've heard a few things about call centers too. Some people who have worked here are like goods and bads.
A lot of people here work for Nelnet.
Yeah. Yeah. And we had a kid in church that worked for Spectrum for a while.
Yep.
And he was like, yeah, I made a ton of money, but it is like the worst job ever.
It steals your soul. It drains it.
Right.
It abuses it.
Yeah. Reminds me of The Office.
Yes.
Yeah, the guy from the call center.
Gosh. Yeah. So at the call center, the training actually happened on a Sunday. It was like 9 weeks of training, and it always, at the beginning of every week was Sunday. And so I had to kind of step back from that church, and just happened to be I had to step back from that church for livelihood purposes, but also because something happened at that church where it was like, you know what, I can't be here anymore. You revealed yourself in terms of what kind of church you are, the leadership that you have, so on and so forth. So I started working at Verizon 40 hours a week, and I actually found my current church at that time. And at that time, I was offered a position of youth leader. It was an unpaid position, But when I was offered that, my wife and I spoke, and after about 3 weeks of coming to that church, we said, yes, we're going to be the youth leaders, because we looked at the youth group, we saw what was going on, and it was clearly God was, putting it on our hearts to go into youth leadership, and to be in ministry in that way. So I was working at Verizon 40 hours a week, but then I would be planning sermons, I would be planning trips, I would be planning retreats, fundraisers, things of that nature.
How big was that youth group at that time?
When we came in, it was about 15, and I saw an issue where the Word of God was only preached 10 minutes, and it was 50 minutes of games.
Yeah.
So I switched those two and took it from 15 to about 7.
So there was youth leaders before you?
Interim. There was interim youth leaders. It was kind of like the older ones who were in the church, the older people who were doing like young adults, but they were doing other things. They would conduct the youth group.
Yeah, I
and
gotcha.
it was like, I could do it for X amount of time, a month, 2 months, 3 months.
Yeah.
It switched hands a lot.
Gotcha.
So it was just there. So I took it down to about 7 people because some of them were there for the games and not for the word.
Yeah.
And then that started to increase. But all the while, I'm working at Verizon. And right out of training, which was a pretty big rarity, I actually got a promotion. So when you leave training, you go into the general customer service lineup kind of thing. But then there's other branches. One was tech, and one was customer pro. Tech was, pretty self-explanatory. Customer pro is retention. So I managed to get a promotion right out the gate with customer pro. So if you were cursing off people, you get me. If you wanted to disconnect, you get me.
Gotcha.
And so I was doing all that while doing youth ministry. So it was a lot of hours. It was 40 hours here, at least 20 plus over here.
Yep. With a newborn.
With a newborn, yes.
Yeah.
And so with Customer Pro, I actually was very much, if you actually follow the Word of God, it says, do all things as unto the Lord. So I worked like I was working for the Lord, and I got recognized. I got promotions. In fact, I actually got a free trip to Universal Studios because I was in a competition that they do company-wide, where I went to Universal Studios with 3 other people in my call center, and we had like a private concert with Daughtry and like something Gentry, some country,
Really?
some country singer that I never heard of. I actually like them better than Daughtry, even though I don't like country. But it was a private concert, and so I was getting bonuses. I was getting things of that nature, but I was still called to this part of ministry.
Yeah.
And so that was the job I was doing while getting a small stipend, I'll put it that way, for youth ministry, and kind of coming into more of the focus of kind of your goal here is there was a point where I did not want to work that job anymore. It was a lot. It's a lot of stress. It's a lot of like verbal abuse through the phone. Anytime I get somebody, I know it's not their fault. And I'll say that every time, like, hey, you didn't do this, but this is the predicament that I'm in and you're trying to help me. Yeah. Because you don't want to be a jerk. Really. Catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar.
Well, yeah, I had to work a service shop desk at a power sports store for a while, and that pushed me just about to insanity because it was the same. It's like do your work as unto the Lord, and you're being your best person, and like, let me help you. I'm trying to help you. I'm on your side. But then people would come in, and at the service shop, it's like, all right, these guys in our other part of the store screwed you over. And then now you're coming to me, and I have to be the bearer of bad news, and you're mad at me for it. And so
you're the ring out person.
Yeah.
Like, let me just unleash all of my rage on you.
I got cussed out quite a bit. Everyone, I am always the enemy. Every time if there's a problem basically anywhere in the store, it's like, all right, they're calling me. And that the store was set up in a way where it was like all the different departments compete against each other for profitability. So they were always trying to screw each other over.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
That's
and
good
so
model.
my manager, it was kind
Civil
of like
war all the time.
It was like us against the sales guys and the finance guys. And so the sales guys would tell them something, like kind of make some promises. The finance guys would lie and screw around on paper to like make that happen and tell them lies. They'd come to the service shop saying, hey, I have this issue. I need your help with whatever. And I'd say, sorry, can't help you because you signed this paperwork. It doesn't work that way. Well, they told me it's, the biggest one was warranties and it's bumper to bumper coverage. It's not bumper to bumper. Like, you can't just run into a mailbox and us fix it. That's not a warranty issue.
All right, fine. Help me on camera. No.
Yeah. And so what my manager told me to do, which helped a little bit, was like, anytime you have a problem, send them to the finance guys. And I started doing that. And then I just got in more trouble. And our general manager actually came down and told me to quit doing that because we were costing our finance guys money and contracts and it was causing more issues. And I'm like,
just improper instruction.
Yeah. So that stressed me out. So I understand oh yeah, you get cussed at and it's like, this isn't my problem. I'm just here to try to help you. Yep. And they don't care. They want to kill you.
Yeah. The human animal, when it comes to, I don't know how else to phrase it. People they forget when it comes to customer service, that's a person on the other end. It's not their fault.
Yeah.
They didn't do it. So, treat them with respect.
Yeah.
It'll actually work out better if you treat them with respect.
Right. Yeah, they'll help you solve it.
Yes. So with Verizon, it got to a point where I just was being pulled more and more into youth ministry. The 20 hours became 25 to 30 hours of creation time at night with my wife in terms of creating retreats, creating mission trips, creating fun times, just all these different things that revolve around youth ministry. And I started praying. I'm like, Lord, something's got to give here. I want to leave this job, but Verizon hooked you up. You got health benefits for the whole family, bonuses, regular job, stability. And I remember praying. I'm like, God, something's got to give because this is killing me. And this is about, I think I worked there for a few years. I'm trying to remember how long, but at least 3 years. I think 3 years.
And they have to have those benefits, otherwise people would just leave.
Correct. Yeah. They make it really worth your while,
right?
It's like you'll take this abuse from people.
Yep.
And so I remember going in, and the call center director came in, and he started he brought everyone in and basically said, we're shutting down the center. There's 4 centers getting shut down. You have the option of going and transferring or taking a stipend. Now, there are people crying. They've been there 10 plus years. I'm in the back like I'm smiling. Yeah. I'm excited. Yes. And so at that time, our church was a little bit smaller. And I mean, really, it could not support me as an employee full time.
Yeah.
Especially for what I had, wife and daughter. And so when that call center shut down, I just was like, all right, what am I going to do? And so I worked on my resume. They brought in professionals who are, they contracted people who really were well above my pay grade for advice on, finding a job, resumes, and so on. So I just utilized them. I got my resumes going, and I was like, all right, I don't know what I'm going to do. But the church brought me on part-time, but it wasn't enough. And I did not want my wife to be working and put my daughter in the hands of some stranger to watch her. And I know that some people don't have that option, but we didn't want that option. So I said, I'm going to be able to do church ministry part-time, I'm going to find another job. And at that time, there was someone who was at the church who had a business where, let's say somebody needed cancer treatment, dialysis. They lived in one location in one city, but their dialysis was in another city. They would call their insurance company, and then the insurance company would call this service. It was a driving service. So they called this service. They'd schedule the pickup and everything like that. Then I would go pick up this person from whatever location they were at, and I would bring them to their appointment in another city, in another town, and then I would bring them back. So that was very beneficial because it was, okay, this is a part-time thing. It will supplement the income that I wasn't making, but it had a downside to it, which was the only time that I would get paid is when I was driving them.
Right.
So let's say I go to pick them up. They don't show up. Let's say the pickup was an hour away from where I live. I just wasted 2 hours of my time for no pay.
Yeah.
Let's say I pick them up and I bring them, and this has happened, and I bring them to another location an hour away. While we're an hour away, I have to wait for them to get out of there.
Yep.
Sometimes it wasn't just an hour, it was 3 hours, 4 hours. So now I'm in that location. I go to the local Panera, and I would actually do my work with youth ministry. I do any kind of logistical work I could do, creations, sermons, all that stuff. I do anything I could do for the church because I started branching out more outside of youth group and would start doing church-related work altogether at the local Panera. But sometimes it was, okay, we're 5 hours in here. Should I just leave? And there were times where they said, oh, we're going to keep them overnight. So now I just spent 6 or 7 hours in this location, and I only got paid for 40 miles.
Yeah.
And it was a certain amount per mile, and it wasn't that great.
Yeah.
And in the same way, that kind of position, it wasn't a good scheduling because not everybody, you would have somebody you would pick up an hour away. It could be a 2-hour drive. It could be an hour and a half drive, and you might end up being there all day. I couldn't schedule certain things regarding church related meetings, scheduling things with mentorship and things of that nature. It was such a sporadic schedule. It wasn't predictable where I could not do certain things properly. Like I was always clear at night, but during the day I couldn't schedule anything else for my primary job and purpose, which was ministry. And so that started to cause a problem. I did that for about 3 years.
And it's, it's not like it's not like doing people do DoorDash or
Nope.
They do Uber, Lyft, whatever, where you just, hey, I'm gonna go on the app, pop on a schedule. I'm gonna work for 3 hours. Like my cousin did Uber for a while, and she was like, yeah, I work during the day and do this, whatever, and then at night when I got nothing to do, I just pop on the schedule, drive around, and when I'm done, I'm done.
Yep.
It was like you literally had to like you couldn't say, oh, I'm gonna go take this person here, I'll be right back. It's like I don't know exactly how this is gonna play out.
It was like the day before.
Yeah.
I would get a call from the person coordinating the trips.
Yeah.
They'd say, I have a 10 a.m. going from Lincoln to Omaha, an hour difference.
Yep.
And the return is at 3 p.m. So I'd have to calculate, okay, I'd have to get up at X amount of time.
Yep.
I wouldn't be back until 4. What do I have tomorrow that's church related for my part-time pay?
Yeah.
But I didn't care. And so if it was like that and it didn't work out, I could say no. Then other times they'd say, oh, there's a pickup. And I never did this one again. I remember doing it. There's a pickup an hour and a half away at 5 a.m. An hour and a half away at 5 a.m.
So
that
really
needs to go 2 or 3 hours. You wanted the longer trips because you get paid more.
Right. Yeah.
And I did that one. I almost fell asleep at the wheel at 3 in the morning. I never did that again.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like they present you with the options the day before.
Yeah.
And if it worked out for me, I would take one. But to maintain my employment status, I can't say no to everyone as well as for the whole reason of supplementing income.
Yeah.
And so there were some where it's like, I have to waste this day now.
Yep.
Now I have to do this. And it got to a point where I was barely, after 3 years, barely taking any trips because it was like, this won't work. This won't work. This won't work.
Yeah.
And I essentially was kind of a bad employee at a certain point because I wasn't really being utilized, but they actually let me not keep, but they let me park the taxi at home and kind of use it. I didn't really do much with it.
That.
Yeah. And so I drove the
van.
taxi to and from work. And, it really, again, I wasn't like driving and taking long trips or nothing, but I utilized the taxi. And when I wasn't taking as many trips, they said, well, we need to use that taxi for people who will take trips. I said, okay, here you go. So that was a benefit of it at the time. But I don't regret that because of ministry purposes. There was a lot of people I met that were hurting and broken and sick. I got to pray with a lot of people, and because of how I look, they didn't know I was a pastor, so they would talk to me. And then when I would reveal that, it was like, okay, now if the floodgates were open with everything, now the floodgates didn't exist anymore. Now they're going to tell me everything, and so I mean, there's people that actually come to the church now that I drove. Ironically,
okay.
Yeah,
Nice.
Praise God. So after that, that's when COVID hit. So I stopped doing that. I said, I need something a little bit more regular. And again, I was still part-time. Now the part-time pay increased, but it still wasn't enough. And so there was someone coming to the church that was essentially a headhunter. They had a business or what is it called? Not a firm. I'm trying to think of what it is. Like
Agency?
like an agency, an employment agency, where they would headhunt for big companies. They'd go online, they'd go to LinkedIn, and they would use these ridiculously awesome algorithms to find, the best candidate who's suited for this company.
Gotcha.
They're wanting someone proficient in this program, this program, this program, this program, and you need to find someone who has all that. So you would go into LinkedIn and just hunt.
Oh, so you would find.
Yes, I would find those people on
Gotcha,
LinkedIn.
okay.
I would use their methods.
So are you like a LinkedIn nerd now? Like
Not at all. I don't remember any of it at this point.
Okay.
This was during 2020.
Yeah.
And I just got employed in like January. And it was a stay-at-home job. I said I can work from, I think 8 to noon. So every morning I get up. It was nice. I go into the office in my spare room and I do the headhunting. And they actually said, "Oh, you're showing promise. You're doing really good." And I think I was the only guy employed. All of it was ladies.
Yeah.
Like really business-minded ladies.
Yeah.
And so I was doing great, but I was at the bottom of the totem pole. And so in April, when everything shut down, I was the first to go. So I just started this new job to replace the taxiing job, the driving job, for the regularity and the supplemental income, because it was sufficing for sure. But then I got axed. And so during that time, I was actually able to work at the church more because of the different avenues that were being presented with all these different employers in terms of money, in terms of, I don't want to call them grants. I don't know what you call them, but anyway. So I got to work for the church, and during that time, I did a lot of different things. I actually launched our app. I designed it. I figured out how to use their program. We started going live at church, so I was somewhat involved in that. Not necessarily the logistical side, but somewhat involved in
that only happened during COVID?
Yes, we weren't live beforehand. We were doing public access, and we were recording. And then a certain someone named Corey. Would actually render that, bless his heart. He would render it every week, and then he'd send it off to digitally to public access. And so we didn't go live until that time. And he actually was probably, I would say, the main guy. The other guy, Brannon, who's our other sound guy, they were both tag teaming, not only broadcasting radio from the parking lot so people can actually come and do drive-in service, but then going live. And I was involved in that to a degree, but I wasn't involved in any logistical or technical side. I was involved in how can we do this, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And so I got to work for the church more at that time. But then when everything kind of subsided at the end of 2020, maybe beginning of 2021, I still needed supplemental income because the church was, again, not at the point where I can get hired full time. And so there was someone else at the church who had bought 3 Anytime Fitnesses.
Yep.
And Anytime Fitness doesn't really, it needs a manager, but it doesn't need a manager full time.
Right, yeah.
It doesn't even need a trainer full time. They're self-sustaining, And so I was hired with the intention that I would go there several days a week from 8 to noon, and I would do the tasks that he would put before me, which was either cold calling people, following up with people, responding to emails, cleaning, general maintenance. But all those things, I became proficient at them where they didn't really take me that much time. So the remainder of the time when I was there, I'd sit in the office, I'd handle anything that came up, but I would also work on church things, and he knew that. And so, again, sermons, creation, fundraisers, things like that. And it got to the point where I was also trying to help him because he didn't really have a great social media presence, and you worked for him at one point.
Yes, I did. Well. I remember that.
I don't know if you talked about that in your...
No, I totally forgot that I worked there.
But there was a point where, as a hobby, and I was doing this for the church, I utilized it on numerous occasions. I did some video film editing, some digital film editing. And so I actually came up with a whole bunch of different different things, some
Yep.
funny, some like fitness related videos where I took the trainer, I took managers, and I just made videos that he can put on social media to promote his Anytime Fitness gyms. And then it got to a point where finally the church was able to hire me full time. And that's where I stepped away from it. And I said, if you need me to come, if you're leaving, if you're in a bind, I'll come clean. But otherwise, I'm not going to be here.
Yep.
And that was how that worked out. And so I've been at church full time since then.
Yeah. And kind of what's funny that I see about this is like, so you say like you were called into ministry, right? And so you're doing all these other jobs. And I would say the majority of them are like ministry skills. So for example, you're working at Bed Bath & Beyond as a salesman, talking with people and like, hey, let me help find you solutions for what you need. And then you go into, what was the next one you said after Bed Bath & Beyond?
The employment agency, the geographical, the shirts, logos, embroidery, all that.
Right. Yeah. Again, sales. You're talking with people, trying to get the sales, going around, looking at people.
Got to learn Lincoln from that.
Exactly, yeah. And I learned, so when I worked at Jimmy John's, that's how I learned Lincoln. And it was like you're forced to like learn how. I didn't know Lincoln was weird to me because I thought it was like, there's all these streets. I came from a small town.
Oh my gosh.
So I'm like, oh, the street numbers.
Freaking place.
Yeah. And it is like, oh, the named streets are alphabetically and they go like this.
Yep.
And then the numbered streets are vertically and they go that way. And then these go that way and it cuts off right here. And then obviously the weird part was like, well, there's this one random street that just like cuts through.
Yeah, Cotner. That's it.
There's, Cotner.
That's the only thing that makes it confusing at times.
And then there's like, there was a Vine is one that's also weird because it like cuts through Lincoln and then it like cuts off for like 3 blocks. And then you have to like get back on Vine. Yeah, I tried.
Someone with city planning screwed up in a few different ways.
Yeah,
but that's okay.
it does not have the infrastructure for it. But anyway, so you go from sales to customer service and like all of these things, which I find it really interesting. When people do that, it's like they kind of have a tendency to get the same jobs. And then you go into driving, which is customer service, picking people up and you have to spend hours with them on the drive. I find that very interesting. People tend to have a habit of like what they enjoy doing or what they were like, you can kind of see they were called to this area, you know, whether you're Christian or not, it's like you have a tendency of what your skills allow.
Oh yeah.
And so like ultimately then you end up, you got all these skills and you're building them up. And then it's like, all right, full-time ministry. And now you have all these skills of like how to deal with people in church. Because Lord know that is a skill. So, and it's not one I typically have, but all these people, they like do the same thing and they eventually are like, oh my gosh, I did this job, which I learned that from, and this job, which I learned that from, comes into like full circle. Now I'm here. And this is the ultimate skill that I learned. And this is what I love doing.
I'll say this. When you're building towards something, you have an opportunity for perspective. I look at all those jobs, however annoying they were in their own ways, they honed aspects of my craft.
Yeah.
They honed aspects of my calling. They equipped me to be ready to deal with sick people, to be able to have empathy, to be able to de-escalate, to be able to sell the gospel.
Yeah.
Because you know what? I got the best product on the face of the planet, which is Jesus Christ himself and the Word of God. And so every single one of these helped me to be equipped to do what I'm doing now. And they all have come into play at numerous times throughout my life. And that's kind of, I mean, that's what I see for a lot of people. Whether you're Christian or not, you know, if you're really pursuing an aspect of employment, an aspect of financial gain, an aspect of really just your niche in life.
Yeah.
More often than not, like you said, the jobs that you're getting are shadows or an aspect of what you're looking to go towards, what your goal is. They're just a sliver of each. But I would say this, don't be discouraged when it's not everything you want, because it's still equipping you for what you're going to be doing. If you actually pursue that goal. Now, again, I have the Lord on my side on this one, because there's a difference between a calling and I want to, because there's a lot of pastors who go, I can public speak, so I should be a pastor because I love the Lord and I can public speak. That's not what makes a calling, but I mean, every single thing. Never take anything for granted, because it's going to equip you in some way to really make you stand out with other people. Like there's skills that I have from all these jobs that a pastor who's in similar age or even older, they don't have that skill set because they didn't go through these jobs.
Right.
You know, in the same way, you're going to have somebody who owns a bakery who's going to be able to do a little bit more in terms of the versatility in baked goods because they went through it. Let's say being an intern, they went through it at the school. They went through it, baking at Walmart for a time.
Right.
They're going to have more skills than someone who just was able to buy a bakery and said, I like making cookies, so I'm going to make 5 different types.
Yeah.
So,
and I just find that fascinating, especially your story, because it was like you look back at all these things and it was so in line with so many different things, and you ended up like in ministry and all these jobs. Like you never got like, I got a landscaping job where I'm alone and I learned how to cut lawns and stuff like that. It's like that would not necessarily have any use for the church other than like you can mow the lawn for free or something. But it's like you didn't get those types of jobs. You didn't have those types of like, essentially you could call them side hustles. Like you were doing them on the side, especially like driving. Like even that was very much in line with what you ended up doing. So I find that very fascinating. And that's also one thing, like in my life, it's been a lot of going here, doing all these different things. And then you end up at a certain point and all these things you look back on kind of led you up to this. But in that time, I was super discouraged because I'm like the one thing I can say right now, which is the craziest thing, the one thing that I've been doing for more than a year, other than hobbies of like, well, I've golfed in high school and I worked out and whatever. The one like actual money thing that could be a job is like eBay. I've had 30 different jobs and they've never lasted more than a year. I have always, for one reason or another, changed from this to this to this to this to this. And then the only thing that I've actually done for more than a year is like selling on eBay. And that's completely just like a little side thing. But it was just like all of these things just eventually led to like what I'm doing now, which is like social media, selling on eBay. And it's like a lot of technology. And I was learning all these different aspects throughout all these jobs that I was really mad at because I don't like that job and I don't like this job. And then getting all these connections and then building all this, like all these skills. And then eventually it's like, all right, here you are. And yeah, it's insane.
And I'll say this, because I know I've been talking a lot, which thank you for having me again. When I was younger, there was 2 different kinds of jobs that I had. It was retail.
Yep.
And it was food service. And again, food service in New York, but I worked for like, some of the franchises and some that were just, privately owned businesses. There was one time going into this that I was pushed and pressed to get a trade. I was a plumber's apprentice for one day. Because when I started doing it, I said, this is not my thing.
Yeah.
This is not going to sustain me. This is going to annoy me. And more than anything else, even at a young age, I recognized this is not my niche. I'm not going to enjoy this. That's why I did it for one day.
Yeah.
And in the same way, I would say this, there are a lot of people that try to force things where it's not your niche. Knowing your personality, knowing what you're called to do, knowing your purpose, knowing your skill set, however you want to phrase that and whatever framework of your worldview that you have, you have the capability of learning these things. But even if you have the capability of getting trained on something, learning a trade, learning a different skill set, it doesn't mean you're going to enjoy it. You probably should just get better at what you will enjoy.
Yeah.
Just a little side note there.
And another big thing is like when you mix ego into it also.
Oh yeah.
I think there are some high schoolers and college kids on here, but I will tell you, in high school, I was an ego fanatic. And so that when we graduated, I was telling my mom this just this past weekend. I was like, I remember looking at our graduation pamphlet, and I didn't try in school. I hated school. I was an A and B student because I had to. When I got C's, my parents said, you can't go to homecoming unless you get a B. And so it was like, they tell the story of one test I had like an 83, and an 84 is a B minus. And so it was like, I had to do good on this test. And I actually got the highest grade in the class. So it was like, I did all the extra credit, got everything right, ended up getting like 107% on the test, which just boosted my grade up like 3 points. And they're like, see, I knew you're smarter than this. But I didn't like school, but I did like the ego of like, oh, I can do hard things and people look at me and I get the attention. So when I was looking at our graduation pamphlet, I was looking through that and I said, oh, I'm one of 3 or 4 people going to a university. There's only like 4 or 5, maybe 4 or 5 of us that were going to a university. And I only had a class of 66 people. And so I was like, oh, I'm one of the 5 people. You know, I was the only boy.
I'm going to the island.
Yeah. I was the only boy that got above a 28 or above on the ACT. And it was just like, I'm a good test taker. And so it was like, I got recognition for that. And then I was like, oh, people are looking up to me. They expect me to do something hard or whatever. So I was like, all right, I decided I'm going to go to the university. I'm one of 5 people that did that. And then I compared all our degrees, and it was like, they're going for chemical engineering and she's going for journalism or something. I'm going to go for mechanical engineering. No idea what it's about. It sounds hard. Something about mechanical. I like mechanics being like automotive. I really liked power sports and automotive stuff. And so I let my ego get into that. And there was one girl who was the valedictorian. She was a friend of mine, and she said, you're going to hate that. You will hate it. I can already tell you hate it because you hate math. Like, you're good at it. You're good at math, but you hate math class. You hate school. This is a ton of school. You're going to go 5 years minimum, and you're going to get an office job, and you're going to hate it. And I was like, no. And then I got all the congratulations. Oh, you're doing mechanical engineering at the university. Whoa, that's expensive. And that's a hard degree. And I'm like, heck yeah, it is. And so I used like this ego when I was in high school, comparing all of these things together, go to the university and dropped out the first semester, failed a couple classes. And, you know, eventually that's how I met my wife. And that's how I, through all these different jobs and degrees that I got, how I ended up here. But it was like, I knew that wasn't my calling. That wasn't something I would enjoy. Especially the first day we had to tour around Lincoln to look at potential jobs. And it was like, you can sit in an office on a computer and design things for this factory. I don't know if you've heard of Molex. Yeah. So they make like little car pieces. I wouldn't say car parts, because the car parts are interesting. These are car pieces. Like, we make the plastic connector that you connect the computer to, that you plug in the ICU and the PCU and like plug that all into here. And we make the plastic piece that goes around it that's waterproof. And like, our mechanical engineers design all that. And I'm like, this sucks. So I let my ego get into it. It wasn't something I liked doing. And so like, if you're young and you're going through that, figure out what you like to do. At least something you enjoy. If you like talking to people, get something that allows you to talk to people. I enjoy talking to people. Especially when there's a product I'm excited about. And so I ended up working at Shields at a point. And that was like, that helped me, number one, learn about products, because now I have this huge wide array of like, I know all these products and the values and the brands, which helps me with eBay stuff. And then I learned about all this technology and all these different, I mean, that's why I'm live streaming from a GoPro, is because I learned about what you can do with GoPros while I was working at Shields, which was a job I loved. Plus, you get a bunch of discounts and stuff. So that all helps. But it's like, you got to find something that you enjoy. You don't have to find, like, for you, you don't have to be like, from day one, I am in ministry. And, like, ministry is my only thing. But if you know you're going to that place and you find these other jobs that it's like, well, this one, you know, it's not ministry. But without even knowing it, you're like, I'm building the skills to kind of help me
You're working
in ministry.
towards that.
Exactly.
But no one should ever, and this is important, no one should ever, right out of college, right out of high school, think, this is what I enjoy, and I'm not settling for anything less.
Exactly,
You
yeah.
work towards that by taking a sliver or aspect of that and trying to find something that has a portion of what you're working towards. Because
Yeah.
that's how a lot of people end up being unemployed.
Yep.
Because I won't settle for anything less than blank.
Then
It's
you get nothing.
You have no experience. You
Yeah.
have a piece of paper.
Exactly.
You know.
Yeah.
So
Good job.
anyway, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm 26, about to be 27, and I'm still like figuring out the exact lane of like what my life is supposed to look like.
And you still have a
So-
leg up on a lot of people because some
I
people
do,
are
yeah.
45, 50 years old.
Exactly.
Still trying to figure that out and
Yep.
working the same job for 20 years and don't enjoy it.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
it's a valuable thing to be young and try to figure that out. I mean, it's a valuable thing when you're young and you do figure that out.
Yeah.
It's a big one.
Do it while you're young, while the responsibilities are at a minimum.
Yep.
After having a kid, that's been a huge thing. It's like I'm scared to, I get scared to make certain moves now because I'm just like, if this doesn't work out, it's not just me and my wife. You know, me and my wife we can deal with it. Now
Ramen's
it's
a
like,
great food.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's like boxes of mac and cheese.
I think
Sure.
Steph would agree with me on that one.
Yeah.
I don't know if you would.
I'm not a huge ramen guy. I did eat it. I did when I was in college and I didn't have any money because my parents paid for a lot of stuff. And so I worked as a lifeguard. I would make about $200 every 2 weeks. And that was my spending money. I did make ramen in a coffee maker. That was my like.
If you haven't done that, you haven't lived.
That's right. Yeah. So, but yeah, anyway, thank you for telling
Yeah.
the story. Cause that's actually, I didn't know all of that before. I know you've talked about it, about kind of
bits and pieces.
how you got here. Yeah. But I didn't know that. And especially looking back at that now, I realize like how much the church itself has actually grown in a short span of time. Because I remember coming here and I remember driving around with you in that old van, and I totally forgot about that. And I totally forgot about working at the gym. And it was like all these things like, oh my gosh.
Block that out.
Yeah, I blocked out all the trauma in my life. So, yeah, I appreciate you telling me about that. I know, especially a lot of like ministers and different preachers and stuff, they have different experiences. And so it's very interesting to hear kind of like what each one goes to. So
Well, thank you. And yeah, thanks for having me. And again, I've been blessed to even be able to have a job. So
Yeah.
never take that for granted, right?
Yep. That's how I'm operating. It's good to have it. Yeah. So thank you guys for watching. I appreciate you guys giving all the views to my show. And yeah, we will be back with another one. So again, I am Jonah, and this is Side Hustle Central. We'll be back with more tips and tricks. Hopefully, we'll get the eBay store up and running a little more, I would say a little more larger. I don't know. Maybe we'll make another YouTube channel and just dedicate it to eBay whenever that takes off. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time.